Hi guys, in this class we're going to be learning about Lightmaps and baking inside of Unreal Editor. We'll be using Unreal 4.25 to kind of demonstrate how Lightmaps work inside of the engine. By this point we should have a good understanding of how real-time and bake lighting work inside of Unreal in terms of what is a dynamic light and how that would update every frame, and how a static light would generate a pre-computed light map that would then be less taxing on your real-time performance. As you can see in this image above, what we're seeing is a light map at 16 by 16 pixels, which is quite low resolution, and one that's much higher at 512 by 512 and much sharper shadow that we're getting. So we're going to have a look at how we can kind of adjust these manually. Just looking over the actual learning outcomes of today's session is to understand bake lighting in Unreal. So really look at these light maps and where they're being generated and how we can affect them to get a better quality lighting pass. How we can generate these light maps inside of Unreal. And this session will also include a little bit of scene assembly, as we're going to be going over a few chapters to this session where we build a little scene, which I'll talk more about in the next slide. So the day planner will be principles of light map UVing, so how we go about light map UVing in Unreal and how they work. We're going to create a simple room inside of Unreal, just using some of the basic functions inside of Unreal. I want to kind of keep it simple, so we're going to start from an empty scene and build a scene slowly and light it and really see what's going on inside the editor. We're going to look at how we can change our light map resolutions to adjust that quality. So like we looked in the first slide, how we can get from something like this to something more like this. And looking at auto-generating light map UVs. So when you import an asset, the second set of UVs that create the light maps get automatically generated, but we can look at how we can generate new ones or adjust them and update them inside the editor. And this scene will be about kind of following along and building our own little concept and looking at some good lighting principles along the way. And that's why I've included kind of this concept, which we're going to roughly put together in this tutorial, and have a look at how we can set up some basic lighting at this point, just to start to build this look. This is a Sid Mead reference image from his Visual Futurisms, and it's a really nice concept, and it's got a lot of interest to it, so it should make for a good little lighting project to do over a series where we talk about more advanced lighting as we go through. So for this class, it's going to be the focus on principles of light map UVing, which we're going to get started with. This document is available on Blackboard, and it's going to outline how you can create your own light map UVs inside of Maya. I don't want to talk too much about or go into Maya in this session specifically, but because I wanted to focus on the Unreal editing of light maps. But do go over this document. It's going to talk a lot more detail about light map UVs and how we can get the most out of them, how we can keep the arrangements optimized inside of Maya and really control where we put the splits inside of our light maps. But like I say, this is a really good document, so go through it and have a go at doing them inside of Maya. But this tutorial is going to be all inside of Unreal, which we're going to open now. Let's create a new project. So if you go to Games on opening Unreal, hit Next, you can go to a blank scene, press Next, and just enable starter content, and all the other settings can remain the same. Give it a name, so lighting class 01, and then create the project. And you see we've just opened up on the default Unreal project scene, which has a few objects in there already placed, some chairs and assets and things. I kind of want a completely empty scene, so I'm just going to go to File, New Level, Empty Level. So we're now looking at the empty, infinite world of Unreal with nothing in our scene whatsoever. Our world outliner is completely empty, and all we have down here in our content browser is our starter content, which we're going to use to help build a little scene to light. So before we start building anything, I'd like to look up some reference. I'm going to look up Sid Mead, concept artist, well-known concept artist who does lots of sci-fi designs. You'll see his influence a lot in games like Mass Effect or in films like Aliens, but has an excellent kind of color palette and design in a lot of his concepts, and this one works really well with what we want to do because it has lots of reflective surfaces, so we can make it look quite interesting. Obviously, this is quite a complex scene to build in what is going to be quite a short class, so we're just going to kind of block it out and come back to it and develop it further as we go through the lighting classes. So let's get started with some geometry. So I'm going to go to Geometry tab and drag in a box and put that in the middle of our world. And then I'm just going to scale it bigger. So let's say maybe 5 by 5 by 3 up. And that should be a good room size. And I'm then going to duplicate that box. So hold down Alt and drag and set that to subtract. So this one's going to remove from the other one. Obviously all we're seeing is a black space at the moment, but if I go into unlit, you can see there's some geometry there. Since we have no lights in our scene, so we're not seeing anything at all. You might see an evenly lit box like this, but until we start introducing lights, we're not going to have any shadows or any interest. Cool, and if I scale this box down a little bit, you'll see it's going to subtract a floor and a roof as well, and we'll bring it in a little bit this way. And then we have some walls on this side and the opening, kind of what we were seeing in our reference shot. If I position my camera somewhere over here, more or less where we were looking at it from, use WASD. If you find that's a bit fast, you can always scroll the middle mouse button whilst moving and it will slow down your camera a little bit so you can be quite accurate with your positioning. And then just press Control and 1 and that's going to store that position. So now if I go off over here and press 1, I'll come back to that position. So that's really useful, certainly when you're setting up the lighting for your scene, to be able to refer back to the same location. I'm going to go into my starter content and pick out a wall material, so just a basic wall. I'll drag that onto these walls and you'll start to see they're glowing now. So again, there's no lighting information here, they're just seeing the even whiteness of those materials. So let's bring in a light and start with a directional light. So if we go to lights on the side here, you've got your directional light. I'm just going to drag that in, and whichever direction this arrow is pointing is essentially the time of day or the direction that your light is going to run. I'm going to need to turn lit mode back on, and I can see the shadows being cast. It really doesn't matter where this light is positioned, it only matters about the angle because it's just casting infinitely through the world, the directional light. So I'll just move it over here so I can see it, and more or less where it goes. We can pilot these lights to place them a little more accurately. So if you right mouse on a light and go to pilot directional light, you can position it manually. You can see I'm kind of upside down, but I can get that angle, and then I can eject and be left with the updated lighting angle. So if I pop back inside my scene, you see you've got some light being cast through. We could add a fill light as well, so something at the back part. If I look at our reference, you see you've got this kind of blue gradient going into the orange. So for that, I might just start with a point light. So if you go to your point lights and just drag one in, and you'll see that will glow like a big sphere in the back. You'll notice that when I placed it, it was a lot darker and it gradually got lighter. And as I move around my scene, you'll see that the lights are kind of adjusting, and that's the auto exposure, that kind of effect you get when you walk from a dark space to a bright space and your eyes adjust. That's kind of automated inside of Unreal. You're better off disabling it whilst you're doing lighting because it's always counteracting what you're doing. You can bring it back later on or play around with the strength of it, but for now we're just going to disable it and go to Settings, Project Settings, and type in Exposure at the top. And you've got auto exposure. I'll just untick that, and you'll see that everything just got a little bit darker, and the lighting is no longer going to change as I'm moving around inside my scene. I'm also seeing this grid, which I don't really need at the moment, so I'm going to hide that. So we're going to show and turn off the grid. And I'm going to start to introduce some color. Not to worry too much about this preview for a minute. We're going to talk about that in a second. I just want to get some lights working in the scene. So let's select our directional light. And I'm going to use a temperature. So under the details, we've got this temperature setting. If we tick use temperature and drag that to a low value, so you start to get these orange, because this is a tungsten scale, so it can accurately go up through into those strong orange colors that we're seeing inside our reference. That's pretty good. And then with this point light, we're going to go for something the opposite end. So use temperature again, but just go for the blues. So we've got that blue going into the orange. And now both of these lights at the top under their mobility settings are set to stationary. So this one, our point light and our directional light are both stationary. So we've got static, stationary, and movable. Static is baked lighting, which is what I wanted to talk about the most in this session, where materials are created based on our lighting setup and they're assigned to the models, and so they're calculated before the game or project is running, whereas a stationary light is mostly baked. I mean, it will generate textures for the shadows, but we can update them, some of the parameters, so you can adjust the lighting color, for example, and the intensity during the playing of your project. And movable, that's a fully dynamic light, so that's going to be updating every frame. None of these materials are created to fake our global illumination. It's purely done at runtime, and you'll see that in some projects, and certainly when we're looking at things like ray tracing, which is going to be fully dynamic lighting. But there's going to be times where you're going to want to have hybrids of both, and that's what you're going to see most of the time. Maybe your sunlight is movable, but most of your point lights and things are static because they're not changing during the playing of your project. You can see it says lighting needs to be rebuilt, and that's going to be the process of building those light maps. Before we actually build them, we can prioritize sections to be built. So right now, Unreal doesn't really care about what's inside, what's important and what isn't. But if I go to this side and type in importance, you'll get our light map importance for you. And what this is, if I drag it into the scene and drop it in the middle, is just essentially going to be calculated first and with more priority than anything else. So stuff that's sitting well off outside of our area, if we had a big vista or something in the background but didn't really need a detailed lighting pass, then we would exclude that from this cube and it would prioritize this section. Make our build times slightly quicker as well, because that can be quite a long time waiting. Every time you need to recalculate these materials that make up our lighting, it takes time. So we're going to do that now. So I'm just going to hit build. And what we should see is this swarm agent appear in the bottom, and that's your renderer. That's calculating the bounces of your lighting and then projecting those, clumping those materials together to end up with this result. So you can see that's quite a significant change. We've got quite a lot of light in there. What it's actually done, if I go into my world settings, go down to where it says light mass, and you'll see this bit, light maps. 3 light maps were made. So if I open that, what were generated were these 3 textures, and they make up the lighting of the objects in here. If I double click on them, I can have a look at them. So you can see they're very colourful. Clearly none of these colours are inside of our scene, and they're quite small, 256, so they've not got much resolution, and they're packed together. And what I mean by packed together is if I look at the red, green and blue channel of our actual texture that got created, is packed different images into each channel. So it's been quite efficient in the way that it's used each different channel for its for the way that it's set up each texture. And if I go to each one, you'll see a different image. It's hard to make out exactly what they are. This could be part of anything really, but these shapes are essentially what we're seeing, and they become more clear as you get more resolution. You can start to make out the lighting and the edges of your objects. Let's turn all that back on, and I can exit that. And so if I go to my lighting only, lighting only, you can see the quality of the shadows aren't great. They're really kind of spongy, and you can't really make out much of the shape. So we want to work out how we can increase the quality of it by going to our Fox brush, details, and we can convert these native geometry box brushes into static mesh, so normal meshes that you might import as FBX into Unreal, and that way we can look at its UVs and work out how we can improve the quality of the shadows. So to convert these two to a normal static mesh, I can just select both of those meshes, and in the Details tab, just go to that little drop down arrow and hit Create Static Mesh, and it'll ask you where you want that static mesh to be and what you want it to be called. So we can call it SM_room and create static mesh. Nice, and now we have this. We will need to rebuild the lighting, and it probably would have changed the way the light maps appear, but we can have a look at that by clicking on our static mesh, so opening up in the editor and looking at its UV channels at the top. So you've got UV channel 0, which is this, which is overlapping UVs, so for a repeated material, and our second set of UVs, which is our light map. So this is all uniquely mapped out, so we're not got shadows that repeat in surfaces. It's all mapped out uniquely. We can repack this if we want to update the shape. I don't think it's matching perfectly. We can tell by just going back into the scene, clicking on where it says lighting only, go to optimization view modes and light map density, and in here you can see the UVs essentially of our light map. So you can see there's some massive rectangles, so everything's a little bit stretched and it's also a bit blurred, so I'm not getting much quality out of our light map, as you can see on the actual lit mode. But like I say, you do need to rebuild it, which I'll do quickly before updating the settings. So what we can see here is it's rendering completely black, and this is probably an error with the light map because the geometry should still be visible. If I go to a lit mode, you can see that all the normals are still facing the right direction, and there doesn't seem to be any other issues. So it's purely down to the way we've set up the light map. So let's go back to the static mesh, and just going through the settings, we can go down to our general settings. We can see this under this little arrow. If you click on the drop down arrow in the general settings, you can see that we're referencing light map coordinate 0. So light map coordinate 0 would be this UV channel, which is our texture channel, so the repeating one, which has nothing in the 0 to 1 space, and that's why we're getting no lighting information on this channel. The only channel we're going to get our lighting to work on is channel 01, because this has got all of our UVs inside this 0 to 1 space, this texture space. So if I change the reference coordinate to 1, hit save, and then go back to our model and then press build again. And now we're getting terrible results again, but we can actually see the lighting. So let's go back to our settings, and that will probably be down to our light map resolution being set to 4 pixels. So what we're seeing here is just 4 lit pixels being spread across the scene, so that's not going to give us any detail at all. If we go back to our light map resolution and make it a 512, so that's something a bit bigger, and I'll save that and then build it again. Nice, that's looking a bit more like what we should have in the scene. You can see there's some shadows coming through. They're still not super sharp. 512 texture across this size surface still isn't very much. We could increase that even further and get sharper quality in there. I will tone down this light as it's very, very strong. We can also adjust the bloom levels, but you can see it's at a lux 10, and that's quite a powerful scale. If I went up to 20, you can see it's really starting to glow. If I went down to 5, it's still quite strong, maybe at 3, even a 2. And we can play around with the bloom settings, but once I build that again, you're going to see it really dull, that lighting. Yeah, that's gotten much cooler in there. It's got rid of some of the interesting colour I had before, so I'll push that back probably more in the post-process. So I tend to aim for more neutral colours when I'm blocking out a scene. And I say a scene as we haven't got many of the elements of our scene in just yet. So I do want to quickly add a few more bits of geometry. If we look at our reference, we can see that there's some pillars in there breaking up the shadows and a little bit of terrain outside and this reflective metal object. So I'm just going to block some of these elements out quickly inside of Unreal. So going to our geometry again, I'm just going to grab a box and put that in the center of the world. Or maybe move it out forward a little bit. I'm just going to scale it to the size of a pillar. And then hold down Alt and move to duplicate it. Give it a little bit of a rotation. Move it over here. And we'll set that to subtract. Maybe rotate that a little further. Then add this kind of interesting tapering down here. So that will do. And then I can select those two brushes, this one, and then just hit create static mesh. We can call it SM_column and save it in your content folder. We can now place these columns where we want them on the scene, so just moving them to around here, and then hold down Alt. We might want to turn on some grid snapping just so we can be a bit more accurate in the way we lay these out so they're kind of even. They seem about right. If I press 1 on my keyboard, I can see my camera position. I could shift them all by 10 in this direction. Shift that one back. Okay, that looks fine. And then we can add a little bit of terrain outside, like our reference. And we can add some landscape by just typing landscape up here, landscape, and drag that out into your scene. Just going to position it below our world, so around here. And have your settings, yours by default will probably be 8 by 8. Pop them down to, maybe 2 by 2 is fine, and that will be big enough for what we want to do. And then just hit create. And then we've got our little bit of land. And by default, you'll go to your sculpting brush, so we can start to sculpt in some mountains. So I'm just drawing with my left mouse button, just to get some hill formations over here. Just really quickly, just trying to block out the idea. We can change our brush size over here if yours is too big or want to go a bit smaller. And if you hold down shift, it'll kind of draw downwards, so pushing some of the peaks down again, just to get a little bit of shape to some of this mountain. You can download Lightmaps, so actually taking shots of the real world and generating those terrains using softwares like World Machine is really good for generating height maps, which you can then load into Unreal to get a very accurate mountain formation. If I press 1, you can see what I just did, which is just kind of made some shape on the background, but it's starting to feel a little bit more like our reference is quite a lot higher, which we could push this up even further quite easily, but I'm going to leave it like that for now and introduce some of the other elements. So if I go to the props section, you'll have these SM rocks. I'm just going to drag one into the scene, and we're going to start to build a little rock formation down the front here, just to cut off the foreground a little bit. We can exit the landscape tool by going to modes and going to select, and then we're just selecting the mesh, and then I can start to just select this rock, scale it down a bit. You can turn off your snapping so you can get it to position a little better, and press F just to frame the object. And I'm going to duplicate a few of these around. I'm just going to get rid of my grid. You can always rotate these a little bit to give them some variation and scale them however you like. And then select maybe a few at once and duplicate them. I'll show a few over here. Again, just play around with the rotation and the scale a little bit. Okay, that's fine. And then maybe bring in some of the vehicle that was in our reference shot as well. So I'm just going to add a couple of spheres for that. So we've got if we go to our mode, so let's give it that. Go to basic and you can just grab a sphere and we'll stick a sphere there. Squash it a little bit like that front wheel. And then duplicate another wheel over here. So we're only really blocking out this scene. I'm not going to spend time finessing the objects, but I do want to try and repeat what we were getting in the reference. And so if we look at that reference again, you can see there's a lot more blue coming through in the scene. So let's have a look at our point light. And what we've got is it coming from a single point. We really want a long line of light going across, and so we can actually change the shape of our light rather than duplicating lots of point lights where it's more to calculate. I like to keep as few lights as possible for as long as possible, so we're going to just extend it out sideways. And to really see that working, I'm going to add some reflection to this surface. You can see that in the reference as well, that this material's got a little bit of a ceramic feel. So let's go to our materials and click on that basic wall, and we just need to probably reduce the roughness. So if I click on the roughness tab, it is a parameter, so I could have instanced it, but I'll just drop that to 0.3 or 0.03 and get it super reflective. And you can see you're getting some reflection now in our scene. We can see the reflection of the actual point light itself, so you can see the bulb and the sphere of it. And with it selected, if I go down to the attributes, you see where you've got the source length. If I drag that up, you can see that that shape over here has now become a tall tube-like shape rather than the sphere that it was coming from before. I'm going to rotate that light over to the side. I'll just put the snapping on to 45 and then I can just quickly turn it all the way that way. And I'll continue to increase that length to get it to go all the way across the room. So we've now got a really big bulb. We can soften that radius and you can make it even a larger light source so that less intense. Go for press 1. Still not getting enough of the blue coming through really. I'm going to strengthen that light and adjust the temperature some more, get it even bluer. I might actually have to pick out a different color, so maybe an even stronger blue rather than using the temperature, so I can turn that off and pick out a bigger value. I'll just build that to see what I'm getting. Okay, so that's got a lot of blue in there. These have gotten very reflective, and you see we're getting kind of problems with our reflection. They're not coming up particularly well. They're really dark, and if I was to grab a chrome, which I will down here, like a brushed metal, and drop that onto these spheres, you can see again they're very dark and they're not reflecting particularly well, and that's because we have no reflection capture in our scene. It's another thing to say what our reflection should look like, and we can grab that by going into our modes panel and just typing in reflection, and we use a sphere reflection capture. You get 3 different types. There's a planar reflection, which is flat and maybe more captures puddles and things on the floor, and a box reflection, which might be just as good for this scene. I can see exactly what that reflection is doing once it's been built. So once you've dropped this into the scene, just go to build and build reflection captures. We should start to see a little bit more going on in our reflections as well. To see exactly what that scene looks like, I can go to reflections. You can see we're mostly just getting the white room bouncing around and not an awful lot of interest at this point. Cool. And then I reference these objects aren't reflective in the same way. They're kind of more of a stone, so let's just drag and drop a clay brick on these. And they were also produced from the static mesh actors, so they're probably not referencing a light map channel. So I'll just double click on the object, and well, that's got a light map resolution. It's just set very low, so if I make that 128 and we'll save that, you can see that's updated on all of the models. The UVs aren't particularly great. We can improve the UV mapping by just double clicking on the static mesh, go into where you see LOD 0, build settings, and you can generate UVs for models inside of Unreal. It's not something that you do very often just because it isn't as flexible as a 3D application like Maya or Blender. It does projections really well when you start getting into doing projecting textures onto objects and not using UV so much, and it also does light maps pretty well, which is what we're going to use to UV map the object. So currently we have UV channel 0, which is our tiling layout, which was the original layout, and UV channel 1, which is our light map layout. And you can see that our light map channel is probably a lot better or more even than our channel 0. So what I'll do is inside this section in this build setting, you can see it says generate light map UVs, and the source light map index is 0 and the destination is 1. If I switch these around, so make the source of the light map my actual light map UVs, and the destination the texture UVs, channel 0, it'll then replace it, the layout. I can also go a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll put in a 512. It's going to pack it a little tighter for us as well because it doesn't need as much edge padding on the UV. So with that set, so 512, generate light map UVs, source 1, destination 0. I hit apply changes, and you can see this is my new UV layout. And in here, I now only have one set of UVs because I don't need a light map channel to repeat the same one. I can use the same single UV set. So I'll just save that and close and go back to my model. And you can see that they're now evenly mapped. They're not very, they're obviously very large on there, but the resolution is fine. If I want to change the scale of that, I can just open up my material and we'll just quickly, I would put a parameter on there, but for the sake of scale, I can just scale all this up. The text coordinate, we scale that to 2, so if I times everything by 4, this one, the normal map as well by 4, so 0.4, it should now be 4 times bigger because I times these two by 4 of their original values. So I just hit apply. And we're better. Yeah, a bit better, that's fine. Like I say, I want to concentrate on the lighting, so I'm just putting some textures down just because it really does affect the look of your lighting. Obviously, when light bounces around, it captures colours from all of this information and really affects the look. So having all of this white, for example, in our scene is really brightening our scene. If our texture had been all brick, it would feel a lot cooler and a lot duller. So let's put material onto our terrain as well. We have to do that slightly differently. You can just grab a landscape. Usually you would use a blend material, so I could paint grass and rock and stone, but I'm just going to grab a M_rock sandstone and drag it and drop it over here, and that's just going to assign it to the model. So we now actually have a bit of a textured terrain outside, and we want to kind of bring in a sky as well, because it's obviously pitch black, but we've got some strong skylights. So there's a few ways of making skies and suns inside of Unreal. In the latest version, which we're using 4.25, there's a new system which is really cool, and we'll be playing around with it in the next video. I'm just going to show you the more common method I've been using for making skies to this point. So if I go into my search section and type in sky, you'll see there's a BP sky sphere. I can just drag that and drop it in the scene. And what that is, if I press F with it selected, is just a giant sphere that surrounds our world. I'd have to speed up my camera considerably to zoom back in again, upping all these settings, and then I could fly back at high speed, or just press F and you'll have a much better chance. So select your object and press F. I'll just reset my camera settings, and then I'll be moving around as normal. Nice, so now we actually have a sky. What we want to do is get some clouds and things, so we need to link it with our directional light, our original light. So if I select that, I'm going to slightly rotate it, because in our reference the light's kind of catching this wall over here a bit more, so I've just rotated it 45 degrees actually in that direction. I'll just reduce that snapping and see I can tweak it. Maybe make it a tad shallower, just so it's more of a sunset and things are casting a little further across. I'm going to select my sky sphere, the one I just brought in, and in there you've got directional light actor, and it's set to none. If I click that drop down menu and click this one, it's now going to link our directional light to our sky sphere. So now we're getting a sky based on the rotation of our sun. So if I press build, and we'll see what that update looks like. Okay, so obviously the sky is a little bit bluer than what we want, and we can play around with the colour of the clouding and things, but what we really want to do is just try and recreate a sunset. If I rotate this much further to the point where it would actually be a sunset, maybe 0.5% rotation, I'll just build that. This is another good reason why you want to kind of establish things at a lower resolution. More complex setups will really ramp up the light map size and the quality settings, but my build times will go through the roof very quickly, and I won't have this period of time to block out what I want to do, and then I can start to push the quality once I've at least established the look of the scene. Okay, so you can see the sun's actually down now, and it's just proper sunset, and you're just seeing a bit of the sun glistening over our terrain. So that's not what we want, that would have overdone it, but our sky is still quite bright as well, or at least closer to the colour that we wanted. So maybe to fake the look, what we can have is two directional lights, one that is going to be casting our shadows and one that's going to be setting the time of day. So let's say we leave that one as it is, but we turn off effects world, and so all we're left with is the sky colour, and then I'll bring in another directional light. Direction. And this one, let's just frame it. And then we have the sun coming around there. We'll try and get some of that colour. There's a much redder colour in our reference than what I was getting, so I'm going to push that. and we had it at 2 rather than 10. And if I'm unsure exactly where it is, I can right mouse and pilot that light. And I can see I can just, from an upside down position, I could rotate that, but I can see that that's fine. Okay, let's build that and see what we've got. So you can see I'm still not getting much backlighting on these rocks. I'm getting quite a lot of the blue on there, which isn't really like the reference. So one thing I can do is bring in a skylight. And what a skylight would do would capture the scene around and kind of project it back itself and use it as like a cube map. So it would take a picture of the environment and use that to boost the lighting of a section. It's probably quite strong on its default scale, so I'm just going to turn that down to 0.3 on the intensity scale, just to push some of the ambient light. I'm going to grab that point light and bring back its attention radius because it's probably carrying a little further than I want it to, just because it's affecting the front of the environment. And just rebuild that. So now the blue light isn't illuminating any of the rocks on the back at all, because it doesn't carry far enough. I'm not getting many bounces from our sky to illuminate the back. So I'm just going to tweak this composition a little bit more just to match our reference. So I'll just grab these guys and move them into the building as they seem to sit inside. And this terrain, I could probably reposition it a bit closer as the mountains feel a bit bigger. They're going to be less like mountains and it's more faking of what we had. I'll also build this side up just a little bit more because that was like our reference. So that was under modes. You can just go to landscape and just start drawing. I'll just give it a big brush size and really build up this side and have those big mountains that I'm seeing in the reference. Probably not that big because I've drawn them right through the actual environment, but that was just shift and draw and it will push it back if you've gone a bit big. There's also some other functions to this. If I go to the sculpt menu, I can flatten things, so put the ground back around my building just with that flatten brush. I've got some very tall, very close mountains, but it is closer to the reference. Maybe it's a bit more built up over that section. I'll just zoom on over and bring that brush size down and build up some more there. Remember to put it back in the sculpt mode. There's a bunch of other modes on here, things like noise, but I didn't want to do a class on the terrain tool, just wanted to quickly block out this scene. Because you get a lot more detail from a height map or some projection of real world mountains than you will trying to just sculpt them out in the way that I am. Very mountainous, it's a bit cartoony. Just hold down shift and pop some of that down and give it some erosion and that should be fine. I'm just going to speed through and try and get it closer to what I wanted in the reference, just getting a bit more of the terrain shape, pushing some of the mountains back. Okay, that's fine. And then I'm just going to reposition a few of those rocks. I'll just come out of my landscape mode and add a few more of these in. Just select a bunch, hold down Alt, move, and I'll shove a few more there. Okay, so let's get back to looking at our lighting. I'm just going to jump into our lit only mode. So under lit, lighting only. Slow down my camera a tad. But you can kind of see what we're getting across all of the meshes. You can see that I haven't really adjusted the light map resolution on all of them. If I go to light map density, you can see that there's some inconsistencies. I'm not getting as good a resolution obviously on the landscape as I am on the environment, which is kind of what I want. The spheres are probably larger, but some of the other stuff is quite good. Rocks fairly much the same as the floor, so it's quite consistent across. But the shadow quality, if I look at it, it's still a little bit soft and hasn't really got the quality you'd expect in a high resolution shot. So again, we can go into our light map settings. So I'm just going to select the world geometry that we have, so SM room, and look at its light maps again, so light map channel. And I'm going to redraw it so it's slightly bigger. So let's go to 1024, and we've got our source index light map again at 0 and our destination as being 1. So that's going to replace this one with a copy of this one but packed into this shell. So it's just going to replace that file but with a slightly wider pack for the texture. So if I apply changes, you'll see that the spacing between them is a lot less. So I'm getting slightly more resolution. And I'm going to change the light map resolution to 1024, and that's going to double the size of what we're getting in terms of textures that can be drawn on. And then if I build that, we should see that sharpen up. Okay, and you can see there slightly better quality. We're seeing a few angles in this, but that's just we're looking at quite low resolution geometry. You can really see the polygons in the shape of this object, so we're catching some of that. Again, if I push that light map size up to 2K or 4K or even bigger, it's going to increase the amount of time I'm waiting, but it'll also increase the quality of the shadows. So let's press Alt and 4, and that will go back to your lit mode. Press 1, and just looking at our scene, there's still a few more extra elements I'd like to add before wrapping up this session. And that could be some of this geometry outside, and we're kind of missing the middle of the vehicle. We've got these characters over here, or some other objects, just helping to put some scale on there. So I'm going to put some elements in to block those bits out. So starting with this vehicle, I'm just going to Alt drag it across. To scale it, obviously I'm not going to be able to capture the fidelity of the vehicle and the reference inside of Unreal. I want to put it into a 3D application of some variety like Maya. Just going to try and work out the scale. I don't even think it's an actual vehicle, it's some kind of a dining area or hard to tell. It seems like people just sit inside it, inside a little glass dome. It's probably a bit cleaner than what I've made here with quite a rough metal. I might switch it for would the chrome look better. Actually the chrome looks a bit cooler. I'm going to put that on those elements. There's also something similar to this out in the far distance. So if we try and press Alt, if I hold down Alt and Shift, I can then move an object and move the camera at the same time. So whilst duplicating it, have it move, which can be really useful for just positioning stuff and not losing it off frame. Pop that some out here, speed up that camera. That's more or less, probably even further in the background. Just quite a few things floating in the sky as well that look quite interesting. We could put just some big metal orbs. And these are just placeholder. We can import this entire scene into Maya and edit these meshes into something that looks more like what you'd expect. But for just blocking out, this stuff's fine. Just adds a bit of an idea of what I'm looking to make. Might just try and push the skylight a little bit more as well, because it's really handling the global illumination, so I'm pushing that light around the scene. So I'm bringing that back a little bit more. I put it down to 0.3. Then at 1, starting to fog out some of the distance a little bit more as well. It starts to feel like the scene's a bit more deeper. We can also add a exponential height fog, which will start to add a bit more interest to that vista as well. So if we just type in exponential, you get this height fog. I can drag that into the scene. You see immediately you're getting this kind of glaze over the dust in the air, essentially the atmosphere in our scene. We can change some of the settings for it, so obviously changing the density, can make it super thick on a very foggy day. I'm just going to press G and I can turn off the icons inside the scene, and that way I'm just seeing what I'm getting from this fog. We probably want to go into a much warmer fog because that's what we're seeing in our reference. We're really seeing a lot of this in the shadows. The density is still a little bit higher, 0.3. And we're also going to turn on volumetric fog as well, and this is going to kind of, as I move around, start to add a bit more interest into the way the light cuts through. You can see it a lot more when you've got a sun in your scene, but it's still adding more interest, and as we start to add more geometry as well, that's going to make it feel a bit cooler. I might change this skylight position a bit more as well, just to frame this better. We were using this one. No, that was the light for sunset, so we should rename that really, just to make sure we're not getting confused. So that's our sky dome light, essentially, sky dome, and this one is the one that will be controlling the shadow position. So just trying to frame this vehicle a little bit more. Nice. It would be nice to have some foreground assets there. I haven't got any characters, but I'll just go into my props and grab what looks suitable. Something like a giant glass vase. I might try and maintain its aspect ratio. But just to have something in the foreground for now, and we can switch this out with another object once we get into Maya. Have a nice table look. It's quite a fancy one. Probably better off having this on the table. Maybe have a few dotted around like some modern art. Yeah, might move a few of these rocks forward as well. Just frame them. Just 'cause I don't want to see the end of my room on the floor. You can see that little scene running along, so just fill out the space a little better. Let's actually lose this table. We like it, and we're going to use these a little bit more, and maybe have some that are much larger, or one that's larger. There's a few things that hang down from the roof which I'd like to replicate a little bit, because they again help add more interest to the shadows and break up the lighting a bit more. Yeah, I can stick a few hanging down. Like I say, we can bring this whole lot into Maya and replace them with something that's better suited to the scene. And rotate that a tad. Pop that away. Okay, and shift that over here. I think there's like a big concrete dome out here, so I'm just going to look in my basic shapes and grab a cylinder and scale that up. It's just like a structure of some variety. Might move this a little further back and higher in the sky as well. Even that's just a blockout shape. Seems to have squashed that element. There we are. Move that up. And maybe another one of these as well. Something else drifting off in the long distance. Okay, and now we can play around with some of the reflections. I will put a material on that concrete structure. Nothing too interesting. I've got concrete here. I'll just drag and drop that. That's a bit dull. Poured concrete. I'll just put the basic wall on there, as it's kind of subtle and it's hidden in the fog a little bit, so that's fine. We can maybe scale this up a bit as it's gotten a tad lost in the scene. Make sure it's sitting on the ground. Nice. We can also improve the quality of these reflections. So if we jump into our settings, project settings, and type in reflection, you can see that our reflection resolution capture is only at 128 pixels. I'm going to change that to 1024. This will have an impact on frame rate as we're running, like the performance, but will, once I rebuild the scene, improve the quality of the reflections that we're getting everywhere. And we've got quite a lot of reflective surfaces, so that should greatly improve the quality. We've still got a not very interesting scene to reflect around because it is white backgrounds, but once that's finished building. Nice, so you can see a big quality jump, but obviously we've not got much in our shapes to reflect because we're still in this empty white room. So once we get more interest, maybe get some color, change the shape a little bit more, we can get even cooler reflections going on. I might move this object inside a little bit actually. I think it adds to the scene. I'll do that on both sides. Like that. Might also tile these a little further, so just open up that brick clay where we tiled it up by 4. Might just add to that a little further and push that. I might double the size again, so make that 4. And on the normal map as well, and go up to 8 or 0.8 and just apply that. Okay, it's got a few more bricks on there now, and I might find a different material for these flying objects as a reflection. And then Arcus gold. That does a kind of space sci-fi. You can just play around. But I think just the basic floor, just something that didn't have as much reflection, so they look a little more obvious in the sky. Nice, so the last thing I want to look at is the world settings. And in here you can see our final light maps. Well, I say our final light maps, our updated light maps. If I double click on them, you can see they're a lot bigger than they were before. Still packed into the different color channels, but of a much higher quality than we started out with. We can also go into our light mass settings and adjust some of these values to improve the quality. So our static light level scale can go down to 0.3 would be fine, and that's going to calculate over a smaller area per time, so improving the quality. We can increase the number of indirect light bounces to 10 or maybe even 15, go quite high. Number of sky light bounces, that can be a higher value as well, maybe go up to 5. And the indirect lighting quality, I'm going to stick that on 10, or actually I'll leave it on 1, and that's fine. And everything else can remain the same. You can see that it's compressing our light maps across the board down to 1024, and that's fine anyway, and we'll just press build and see an increase in quality. I did skip ahead to the end in that video just because that build time did push up to about 5 minutes, 6 minutes because of the increase in quality. But you can, if we press F11 on our keyboard, we can float around and really start to see what we're getting from that increased quality. If we go lighting only, you can see we get some nice shadows, nice gradients. Could still improve here in the seams a little better, and that was probably from the way we set up the UVs. So actually doing the UVs inside of Maya could have increased the quality there. These have gotten a bit spongy, so again the quality might have been increased a bit more, but it's also quite low geometry on these objects, so they weren't going to light particularly well, and some of them aren't even positioned particularly well. But again, we're just kind of blocking out. Now I do want to take this whole scene into Maya and really refine the objects, add some bevels to these corners and get a lot more shape. That's going to improve the way that it's lit. But hopefully from this tutorial you now better understand how light maps are working in your scene and the quality that you can still get from them. This was without any dynamic lighting at all, and so able to get a very nice high quality on just placeholder meshes. But like I said, in the next video we're going to refine it further. We're going to look at post-process, so how we can start to do color grading and all sorts of other cool film-like features that we can add to the cinematic look of the final scene. So I'll see you in the next chapter.